Okay, my friend, you know that I would be absolutely remiss to have Marc on my podcast and not do a two-part series on ChatGPT and AI. Him and Nick are the absolute go-to in this space right now, and I'm so grateful that he took the time to share with us, that Marc took the time to share with us all of the amazing things that you need to know about ChatGPT and how to use it as a podcaster. Technology like this is very overwhelming, right? It can feel so confusing to even understand where to begin. And so it's really key that when you're listening to this episode, you start to think and you start to brainstorm all the ways in which you can use ChatGPT and AI to help you streamline your process a little bit, to learn how to use the technology. And we're also going to be talking about in this episode about the ethical piece around this type of technology. Is it ethical? Is it not? You're going to have to listen in to hear our conversation, and you're going to have to listen in to get our answers. So with this in mind, thank you so much for being here for this conversation. I would be so grateful if you could review the podcast, leave us a rating and review where you're listening, either on Spotify or on Apple. I absolutely adore hearing your messages and how this content is resonating with you. So please, please, please indulge me and do me the honor of leaving a review of the show. I am so grateful. And let's meet Marc really quick before we get into this conversation. So Marc Ronick is a podcasting veteran with over 17 years of experience in the space, and he has a passion for empowering podcasters to turn their vision into reality. From launching his first fantasy football podcast in 2005 to founding the innovative NextGen Podcaster membership platform, Marc's journey has been marked by an array of successful ventures. His popular comedy podcast called The Marc and Lowell Show, alongside his childhood friend, has accumulated over 1 million downloads. As the co-founder of the Realm Network and Ironic Media, he continues to help independent podcasters build their brands and reach wider audiences. With NextGen Podcaster, he brings podcasters access to cutting-edge AI tools, expert advice, and a vibrant network of like-minded creators. He also hosts the podcast called Podcast PhD and leads the podcasting morning chat on Clubhouse, engaging with a community of hundreds of content creators every single morning. A community that I'm actually a part of, and I co-moderate with Marc in that space every single morning at 7 a.m., Monday to Friday, 7 a.m. Eastern Time. So let's get into this conversation today and learn about part one of part two of our ChatGPT conversation and experience. And if you want access to all of these episodes in advance and you don't want to wait until next week to hear the next one, join me over on Patreon. You can get all of them right at the beginning of the month, all at the same time by joining me there. So let's get into today's conversation, and I hope you love it. Okay, Marc, welcome back to As It Relates to Podcasting. We have quite a conversation today that we are going to dive into. It is part one of two, and we are talking about what I feel like might be one of your favorite topics to talk about right now. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, I mean, aside from mindset and that personal growth stuff, yes, I would say this one is definitely up there for me.
It is definitely taking the cake. And I want to just sort of preface, and I actually don't normally start out any episodes or interviews or anything like that with this, but you and Nick, who was the very first series on this podcast, have a program called NextGen Podcaster, and it is all about AI.
Yeah.
Tell us about it a little
Nick
bit.
actually is the reason why you and I connected. I mean, he's the one that connected us. He brought you to that Clubhouse room, right? Yeah.
Yes. Oh my goodness. And until then I had only seen you online and seen some of your stuff online. And now look at us. Look how it's evolved.
Yeah. See that? The awesome connections in the world of podcasting. That's for sure. So yes, AI. And I again, like the last episode, I've forgotten the question. So all I know is that you just asked me something about AI. Oh, how did Nick and I get into it? Is that what? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And tell us about your NextGen podcast.
So basically what happened was when ChatGPT made its way to the scene in November, Nick had caught wind of it and reached out to me, and he's like, "Hey, have you heard about this thing yet?" And my response was, "Yes, I've heard of it, and I'm not interested because anything I had seen so far commercially for AI never really impressed me. I thought it was good. There were some of these these platforms that were already out there that you could have it write a blog for you and do those kinds of things.
Yep.
And I never felt like it was really doing it the way I wanted to do it. I kind of felt like I could just do this myself and I'll be fine. So when I heard about ChatGPT, I just thought it was another one of those things. And I think Nick was chipping away a little bit at me, oh, look at what I can do with this. Look what I can do with this. And I was seeing content, and it somewhere a couple weeks into it, I got interested enough. And when I started playing with it, I realized, yeah, this is something that I've actually been looking for a very long time. I mean, when I would go through over the last several years, when I would go through stints where maybe it's like a writer's block kind of thing or a creator's block kind of thing, I remember I would complain to my wife, I wish there was just something, or, kind of like the old commercials, the easy button, right? It's like, I wish there was something that I could just press the button and it would at least get me started or get me going, right? And quickly, when I started using ChatGPT, I said to myself, you know what? This is that easy button for me. This is the thing that will help me when I'm feeling stuck, or it will help me improve upon what I'm already doing. And then I just went all in on it and recognized pretty quickly, well, wait a minute. I teach people about podcasting and I help podcasters. And quite frankly, I was starting to get bored of the same old content that I was teaching people. It's not rocket science podcasting, right? And there's a lot of steps, and the more you know, the better off you are. But I was just getting a little bit bored of it. And all of a sudden I was like, well, wait a minute. I'm using this thing. I can see how I could use it for podcasting, how I could use it to help my clients. Why don't I just find some ways? How do we incorporate AI into podcasting? And so that's how eventually, with a lot of back and forth with Nick and I just talking a lot about AI, we said, why don't we build something for podcasters that we can educate them and help them save all that time and potentially a lot of money as well. So we came up with NextGen Podcaster, and it's kind of a cross between a community, a mastermind, master classes, etc. Because I think there are very few people right now in this world that can say that they're experts in this new technology. And AI has been around for years and years, but this more commercially known technology, nobody really is an expert yet. We're all kind of figuring out how to use it. So so that's why we felt it was important to lean on this more like a community, because we believe the people involved in the community are going to educate us just as much sometimes as we'll be able to educate them.
I love that. That is so, so, so true. And I think that you are both onto something here, because I think it's genius. And I think that you guys got ahead of it in a really, really cool way. And I'm excited to dive into our conversation today, because we are going to be talking about how to integrate AI. This is part 1 of part 2. And in this episode specifically, we're going to be talking about the podcast creation process. Before I dive into that, though, I do want to just say, if you're interested in learning more about Marc and Nick's program, you can find the link to that in the show notes below, the episode notes below. And I do want to make sure that you can check it out. So I didn't want to gloss over the fact that the link is right there. All you got to do is click on it. You're welcome. Amazing. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about using AI for the podcast creation process. How do you recommend starting with AI in general? Like, where do you even begin?
So this would go really for anybody, whether you're a podcaster or not, that's curious about ChatGPT, or maybe you've used it a couple times and you walked away thinking, I don't understand what everybody's so excited about. It's not producing the kind of results that people say it can produce. So what I would encourage you to do is get on there, go to openai.com, sign up, and start playing. Right? It'll open up this chat window for you, and think about it just like very similarly to if you go to a website, a product or a service website that has the little chat button at the bottom and you tap on it and you start talking. Think of it like that, right? And you can get as simple, just to get started and comfortable, go as simple as something like, I want to start a podcast. I want you to help me start a podcast, right? Say something like that and just start seeing what it produces. And don't worry if the results
The answer is going to be work with Marc and Simone, obviously.
Of course. And if for some reason it doesn't do that and you get frustrated because it doesn't give you that awesome answer, keep going, keep playing with it. Pay attention to the answers because, and you've heard me say this before, Simona, ChatGPT is only as good as the questions that you ask it. I often say to podcasters, it's the same advice I'm going to give you about interviewing a guest. If you ask mediocre questions, you're most likely going to get mediocre answers. And it's the same thing with ChatGPT. But to get familiar with it, just ask it however you want to ask it and see how it answers. And you'll see, okay, that answer was kind of vague. Go back and look at your question. And yeah, my question was kind of vague. How do I start a podcast? Okay. But maybe you want to get deeper and then say, I want to start a podcast and I don't know exactly what I want to talk about on the podcast. Can you help me figure it out? And I've done something like that before just to test it. And it will start asking you relevant questions to help figure out what are your interests? What are the things that you're good at? What could you talk to people about? And it'll help you start narrowing it down. But ultimately, it's ask good questions, provide some detail, and be very specific about it. And you'll start to see the magic happen. So that would be the first way I would say to get started with it.
Amazing. I love that. And so when you are in this podcast, creation process, there's so many different components that ChatGPT can help with. It can help with things like writing show notes or planning your episodes or helping, your workflow and helping you create an organized workflow. What other aspects of the podcast process can AI actually help you with? Whether it's ChatGPT or whether it's something else, if there's like another tool or technology or something that you've
Yeah, and I tend to lean on ChatGPT because so many of the other platforms, the AI services that you find out there, so many of them are actually using ChatGPT to produce the results for you. Yeah, so that's why I tend to focus on it, and I recognize there's lots of other software out there too. So yeah, I mean, you can start with things like I was telling you, sometimes I'll get that creator's block, and it can be around a variety of different things. If your creator's block right now is around coming up with new episode ideas, you've done a bunch, you feel like you've exhausted it, or you're not able to come up with something right now, talk to ChatGPT. I do a podcast about this. My target audience are these kinds of people. And maybe you want to tell it, I've already done some episodes on X, Y, and Z. Please provide me with 5 ideas for a new episode, right? And then it'll spit out some ideas. You can kind of pick and choose which ones you like. You could ask it to give you 5 more if you don't like it. But if you find one that you like, then you can start digging deeper. You can say, okay, I like option 3. And then you can start breaking that down. Provide an outline for me for that option, for option 3. And it'll give you an outline. And it may not be perfect. And you want to go in and kind of see the direction it took it. And all of a sudden, you've gone from staring at a blank page to ideas. They don't have to be the best ideas. Just like you're probably encouraged to brainstorm, put every idea down. Don't be shy. Don't censor yourself. Just put it all out there. And same applies here. It's just let it start feeding you ideas and then start getting more specific, and you'll get the kind of results you're looking for, whether it's from ChatGPT or it comes from your own head after some back and forth, right? Creating social media content is a challenge for a lot of podcasters, even though it shouldn't be, because if you're doing your episodes every day, every week, you've got plenty of content to harvest from, right? And you can utilize your transcripts from your podcast. You can hand it off to ChatGPT and you can ask it to find highlights from the episode. And it will pull out some highlights, or you could get more specific. Find me the highlights on when we talk about imposter syndrome. Show me all the highlights and where we talk about imposter syndrome. Whatever that is, you can get it to pull out that content for you. And like you said, show notes. You can have it write your show notes for you. I like to have show notes written in a very specific way. So I've actually trained ChatGPT to write them in that very specific way. So now I can give it the show notes. I can say, write it like this, and it will spit it out based on those transcripts. So lots of different ways.
I love that. And so how do you train it essentially? Like, is there a difference between, because I only have like the free version. I haven't paid to like upgrade or anything like that. But in the paid version of it, is there a way to like set templates, or like what's the biggest differences between the two? I have three different questions for you based
Okay.
off of what you just said, but I first want to start with this one.
You don't need the paid version to train it. I would recommend it for $20. I think it's very worth it. Especially because you then get access to their more robust version, right? ChatGPT 4, at least at the time of this recording, that's the most current one that's out there. So you don't need it to train it. You don't need the premium service to do that. If you use it enough, you'll may notice that on the left-hand side of the chat window, it shows your previous conversations. Okay. And I encourage you to start a new conversation. If you want to train it on something, start a fresh conversation. And so, for example, you may want to teach it how to write show notes in your style, not mine, right? And you've done a bunch of episodes. So what you could do is feed it, you'd say something like this: I'm going to teach you how to write show notes for my podcast. I will provide you with examples of the show notes that I've written. Learn my writing style, learn the formatting style, and whatever other options you want to tell it to remember. And at the end, ask it, do you understand? And that actually helps because otherwise it may not understand some of the direction you gave it. And if you don't ask, it's going to make a lot of assumptions, and it's going to just spit out the answer as best it can. So by asking it at the end, do you understand? It's giving it an opportunity to say yes or no before it proceeds. And if it does understand, usually it will give you its clear explanation of what it just received, so you know it gets it. And then you can say proceed. And by giving it examples, that is one of the best, I almost want to say best kept secrets about ChatGPT, because people just tend to direct it instead of show it. And the more you can show it, I think the better, with an explanation. I think that's the perfect recipe to get the results you want as quickly and effectively as it can do it.
Genius. I love that. And I think that that's one of the biggest pieces is people are like, where do I even begin? Like, how do I even start to create content, through this platform? What do I need to say? What do I need to prompt? And like, that's, I mean, really, like that's if you're in that situation, I highly suggest that you check out your NextGen Podcaster, because this is literally what you guys do. And this is how you help creators. And then on the flip side of that too, I have to caveat and I have to share with you. So I was helping someone yesterday because she was like, it was a friend of mine that's in a mastermind group that I'm in. And she was like, I'm using ChatGPT and I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know why it's not working for me. Like I send it things and it doesn't respond and whatever. So I said, okay, let's hop on a really quick call and like, just show me what you're doing. Well, it turns out she was not using ChatGPT. She was using something else. It was like a whole different program that had been discontinued in 2015. And I know. I was like, first of all, and then we were talking, I was showing her examples, and she works in like the dentistry field, and I was showing her different examples, and I was like, you could write this, or you could write this. And at the end of every time the AI would give me an answer or a response or whatever, I kept saying, thank you so much. Thank you so much. And she looked at me, she's like, are you thanking your AI? And I was like, yeah, I am. Like, I wanted to know that I'm
sometimes
kind.
catch myself being polite to ChatGPT too. Yeah, sometimes I'll say, please provide me with, it doesn't care. I promise you, it doesn't care. It actually may respond in a more polite way if you are polite. That might actually happen, but it really doesn't care. I promise.
I can imagine. It just makes me feel better. It makes me kind of feel like I'm like talking to a person. I would never like not say thank you if someone was giving me a bunch of information, Anyways, I digress. But what's really interesting with this and where my mind is going with this in our next episode, we're going to talk about how to use ChatGPT specifically for content creation and for marketing, whether that's social media content or your podcast in general. One thing that we have not talked about that I think is super important, and it is what you mentioned in our first episode together, is this ethics piece to AI. So, I think at the end of the day, you're going to use the technology if you want to use the technology. That's this, at the end of the day, that is what it is. How are you ensuring that you're staying in integrity and also being ethical? Because, for example, if you're prompting it with, one sentence and you're asking it to write you an entire blog post, one could argue that that's not actually ethical because it's not your words.
And I could say, well, what about if you hire a copywriter? You didn't write it. Those aren't your words, right? You hired somebody to do it. And
exactly. I mean, I've used it for stuff like that. So I'm not judging.
I'm not either. I have too. There's nothing wrong with doing that, which is kind of my point. It's if we accept copywriters, why can't we accept an AI copywriter, right? And there are some debates on the fact that it could be actually plagiarizing if you're not careful, right? Because it has been trained on data up through about 2021, and it could write word for word at least sections of something it found from the internet or from the data that it was given, right? So that's one thing to pay attention to. I think that ultimately the big rule of thumb is, well, there's two things. If you use it completely, like for show notes or to write a blog, I would encourage you to credit ChatGPT. At the end of the article, maybe, this article was composed by ChatGPT. If you want to be even more specific, you can maybe get more specific, something along the lines that you've told people that you fed it the information and it wrote it for you, whatever makes you comfortable, but put some kind of disclaimer. I think that's one way to do it. And I think the best way to do it is to avoid putting out the content as is and make sure that you have put your human touch on it. And just like any tool that I use, and I think knowing you, I think you're the same way, we use all these different tools for shortcuts and to speed things up. And most of them don't do it 100% autonomously by itself, right? So I follow this rule, this 80-20 rule, where if it can get me 80% of the way there and I only have to do that 20%, well, that has saved me a tremendous amount of time. And I don't mind going through it, making sure that maybe some of the advice or suggestions it gives are in line with the ones that I give, right? Sometimes it'll suggest something that I'm just not on board with. And so I'm going to change that, right? That's a big way. And then the last way is kind of how we were talking about ChatGPT earlier. Give it your own content to work with, right? Because if you're giving it your transcripts, it's writing based on everything spoken during that podcast. It's far less likely that it's going to plagiarize someone else from somewhere else. And it's really just going to focus on that content that you've provided. And I'm trying to think if there's any other big thing. I feel like I had one more point about that to make to you. Well, basically training it to write in your style. Okay, so telling it when you're giving it your show notes to learn your writing style. Here's my show notes. Learn my writing style. And a great little hack with that is then to ask it to explain your writing style to you, because it really helps solidify it. And if you ever wanted to go back somewhere else in ChatGPT, a previous conversation or what have you, you could say, rewrite those show notes in this particular style and use the explanation it gave you, right, to write it that way. That's another way you could do it. You could, I've started teaching it how to write in my style in emailing, right? So now it will start to understand and write like me to, maybe a vendor that I might be working with, right? Here's their email. I copy paste the vendor's email and give my response. I'll tell it kind of my overall response, my overall answer, and then it will write it in my style. So you can teach it that way and I don't think that we really finish digging into that. The way that you have it remember something that you taught it is keep those previous conversations where you solely train it on your writing style. It'll save it in that left-hand side, that toolbar, and you can rename it. So I tend to rename those things, like how I write my social media scripts, right? It's Mark's social media scripts. And then I can go back to that previous conversation, give it a new topic, and then have it write it in that style that I taught it.
So can you do more than one topic in one
Yes,
conversation?
you can. And currently, it will eventually forget. I don't want to get too in the weeds with the technical,
Yeah.
but it does have a memory, and it only lasts for so long. So one of the ones that I commonly go back to that I've trained, I will sometimes do like a refresher with it. Right? Sometimes I'll just go in and check to see if it remembers. I'll say something to it like, do you remember your main goal? Do you remember your objective? And it'll say yes, and it'll tell me exactly what it is. Or it may just say, yes, I'm a Chat GPT bot by OpenAI, and I'm here to answer any of your questions. Well, that to me says, okay, you don't remember. And I may give it that main prompt, that main goal again, just to kind of reset it. But yeah, it's not perfect
That
yet
is
in the
super
sense that
cool.
it's not going to remember it forever. But that's coming sooner than we think. They're talking about the memory. There's some concepts right now going on that it's going to increase like 10 to 20 times what it is right now.
Oh my gosh. Which is so incredible and also kind
Yeah.
of terrifying at the same time. Like even some of like the video AI stuff that I've seen, I just like, I really don't think that AI and automation and stuff like that, I don't think that it replaces the need for a human touch on something because you still need that at the end of the day. I think that, with technology like this, you have to find a way to embrace it and use it in some capacity because I think if you don't, it's not that you become obsolete, but like you kind of do though. You know what I mean? Like you really do need to be able to, especially in the industry that we're in, like you have to be able to
Yeah,
keep
you
up.
do. And it's very common for people with new technology to be scared. And
Yeah.
there's good reason. And look, I think we're also all particularly scared because we've seen those movies over and over again with AI and it taking over the world and all of that. So, yeah, I
Yes.
get the fear. And
Which will
it
happen.
could. It
Like
could.
really.
And the way it is right now, I don't know that it ever would, but as it advances, I think that's certainly a
Yeah.
possibility. But just remember that this society, years and years and years, when new technology comes, we get scared. We start questioning how is it going to ruin our society, right? And that can go back, honestly, as far as like, well, it can go back really far, but I'll take it as far back as the 1970s with the electronic calculator, right? The electronic
Mm,
calculator comes out and everybody is really concerned about what's this going to do to our education system. We're teaching our kids how to do arithmetic and multiplication and
yeah.
division, and now we're giving them some
Yeah.
device that they can just do and never learn how it actually works. It didn't ruin our society, and our kids are still learning today. And we found a way to
Totally.
incorporate a tool like that into what we're already doing to help make improve things that much more. So that's the way I try to look at this kind of technology and
Mm-hmm.
why I'm not particularly fearful of it. I'm just mindful of it.
That's the perfect words. That's exactly how I feel as well. Like I feel like, I'm using it, I've adopted it. It has saved me so much time in so many different things, allowed me to create blog posts for my own business that I never would, but I do exactly what you were saying, like take the transcript, feed it the content, tell it what to, essentially, and it's writing it off of
Yeah.
my own words. And so I think that is like a big key differentiator with the
Yeah.
ethical side of it. I think if you're taking something, running it through ChatGPT and pretending that it's your own and that it's your own words with having no edits, nothing changed, nothing tweaked, that I think is a little bit on the unethical side. Personally, for my own integrity, that's unethical to me.
And
but you have to be the person who chooses. Like it's your decision at the end of the day of what is ethical and what is not. Right?
The danger of allowing the ChatGPT to spit out the content and just using it as is. The danger is that, remember that this technology learns off of data, right? And although ChatGPT isn't currently connected to the web, it's learned from the web over the course of years as they've been feeding it. But what's going to happen is, if we're not careful and we're just putting out content that it spits out, we're going to get into a vicious circle at some point. It's going to start learning the data that it's created, right? So what we want to make sure of is that we are inserting the human touch into this. We are inserting our own thoughts and opinions into this, or else it's just going to kind of loop after a while, and it's not going to get new information, and it's going to kind of suck after a while. We're not going to want to use it after a while, right? Exactly. So it's important to make sure that we are injecting our thoughts, our opinions, our perspectives, if we want to see this thing work well for us in the future.
Beautiful. I love it. Is there anything you feel like we may have missed in this first part of talking about AI that is not specific to content and processes and like creating the actual content?
I think we've hit it.
Amazing. I just want to check. I thought so too, but I thought I would just check in, Okay. So thanks so much then for this part of our conversation. I'm really excited to dive into part 2, talk a little bit about the ways in which you can create content, the processes maybe that you can follow, maybe a sample workflow. And I'm going to share some of my ways that I've used it. And I know you will share some of yours as well. So I'm really excited to be
Me too. And I'm wondering, do you think anybody's gotten really distracted over these past 2 episodes with my stress ball? You know why I use this, don't you? Did I tell you why I have this? I'm not stressed.
So.
I'm very calm on your show right now. So it's not you. It's not your show.
I'm actually really glad.
It's because I have ADD or ADHD, and it prevents me from fidgeting with everything else, including my face. And because I get very fidgety. So I just use this to kind of keep my hands at bay.
Okay, see, I'm the same, and I find I touch my face a lot when I'm like, doing stuff where I'll pick up a pen or something like that, and it's not intentional. That's what I thought it was for. And it makes me so happy to know that you're not stressed on the show, because let me tell you, I have another tech issue this round of recording, and I always have tech issues every time I come on. I've talked about this so many times on my podcast. I always have tech issues, which for being a producer, I find that just so ironic.
Well, it's because, it's because you focus on your clients so much that you don't spend the time on your own stuff. That's how I am.
I know. It's so true. And right after this, I'm going to message my videographer and be like, Cam link didn't work, SOS, which is so funny, because I feel like anytime I'm doing something for a client, the solution that I provide always works. But for some reason, for myself, the solution never works for myself.
Right. And here, before we go, I just want to call back to our first episode where we talked about being relatable and sharing stories. This is an example right here, and it was not planned. We didn't do this strategically, but this is what we mean by sharing relatable stories that your audience can connect with.
Exactly. I love that. I love that you called that out. I think it's so important. I really do try and be really, like, I just think that everyone needs that permission piece.
Yep.
You know what I mean? Like, we all go through it. And if I were to ever sit here and tell you that everything is perfect and dandy over here, well, that just be a whole bag of lies. Amazing. Okay. Thank you, Marc. And I will see you on our
Sounds good.
next
Thank
episode.
you.
I know it's not just me that thinks this conversation was so powerful and so impactful. I learned so much from these conversations, and I hope that you are too. If you have, please leave a review of the podcast wherever you're listening to the show. And be sure to check out the show notes for all of the resources that we talked about throughout this conversation. I want to highlight 2 very important resources for you really quick. The first one is Marc's ChatGPT prompt guide. And then the second is the link to his NextGen Podcaster community membership. So you need to go and check out those 2 links. They are in the show notes below. And if you want to connect with Marc, you can do so on Instagram, you can do so on Clubhouse, and you also can on his website. All of the links are in the notes below. Thanks so much for tuning into this episode. Share it with someone you know needs to hear it. And let's get into our next conversation, shall we?